the big picture suggests to me that sometime, maybe not before 2027, 2028, there is this big risk of World War III. However, it's possible that the time frame could be brought forward by either or both conflict over Ukraine developing into a war between NATO and Russia, and or the conflict between Israel and Iran blowing up.
Welcome to another edition of CEO and Market Expert Interviews. I'm your host, Lucian. Some of you know me as Triangle Investor from social medias. Today, I'm joined by Simon Hunt, founder and CEO of Simon Hunt Strategy Services, advisors on the global economy, including geopolitics, China, and copper industry. Did I say it right, Simon? Welcome.
Yeah, you sure did.
It's a pleasure to have you in my show. Finally, big fan of your work, of your interviews. A lot of knowledge shared out there, and I'm very glad that you are in my show as well, so you can share some of your knowledge on my show as well. Thanks. We have a lot of things to discuss, but I want to start with more of a general question. I'm interested in your opinion about the current geopolitical and security situation in the world and how it will develop further, post-election, I mean, of course.
That may be your first question, but it's a huge one.
Yeah, it is.
Because how geopolitics transpires will determine whether we're going into a renewed phase of prosperity, or else we're going into very volatile, difficult times, which probably will lead to rolling recessions, notwithstanding Trump's fantastic sweep across America.
Yeah, that is a short answer on the big question. But really, what do you think will happen with the global economy going forward?
Well, I think there are already a few strands that we have to look at to answer that fundamental question. Where is the global economy heading, and what does it mean for guys like you and I? The first thing that we need to look at is how the Brics group of nations is not only maturing, but expanding. And in PPP terms, Brics has a larger share of the global economy than does G7. The problem, the fundamental problem, is that Brics wants a multilateral world, which is quite the opposite to how G7 operates today, which is a unilateral world dominated by one currency and one country. This monopolistic approach has led to wars, conflicts. You don't do what we ask you to do, we come in and smash you. Look what's happened in the Middle East in the last 20 years. So it was very interesting, the Kazan summit meeting couple of weeks ago. I'm about to produce a large report on it. But really, the declaration was not antagonistic against G7. It was basically saying we need to reform the big institutions that govern the world, like United Nations, WTO, IMF, World Bank, etc., because it's the big countries that dominate and make the policies. Now with the Brics countries, the Deep South, Africa, etc., where future growth is coming from, there's very little influence. So what the declaration is actually saying, we don't want to oppose you. We want our fair share in how policies are made. The problem is that the G7 led by America is very unlikely to give away their authority. So therefore, the Brics is laying out a path towards a world outside the G7. And there were a number of key points, if I can read them out for you, that were made. Creating a multipolar world that is governed by consensus agreements. Establishing an investment and payment structure that bypasses the US dollar. Setting out the road towards a Brics currency, whose assets will be 40% gold and 60% local currencies, which in turn will be linked to gold. Creating an alternative to the US-dominated international financial organization, such as the IMF and World Bank. Developing transport connectivity and logistical hubs between Brics countries. Establishing a Brics A1 alliance to regulate the technology and prevent its illegal deployment. Building the Brics grain and natural resource physical trading platforms, such as copper and nickel, which will bypass the influence of speculative investment funds. Establishing a Brics partnership on carbon markets and climate research, and creating a geo-information platform within Brics. I mean, these are huge, huge platforms that's going to require a very large secretariat, not the small one that exists in Shanghai, Pudong, Shanghai. It's going to take time, but they've laid out the path. And that's why if they achieve their objectives, it will be a milestone in post-World War II history. The problem is, will America and her allies allow this to happen? Which comes back to your original question, which is, what is going to happen geopolitically? The big picture suggests to me that sometime, maybe not before 2027, 2028, there is this big risk of World War III. However, it's possible that the time frame could be brought forward by either or both the conflict over Ukraine developing into a war between NATO and Russia, and or the conflict between Israel and Iran blowing up. What are the odds? I'm not a betting person. I had my last bet in the horse races about 60 years ago. It was a winning bet, and I said, never again. But we have to think about the odds. First of all, Trump is pro-Israel. Iran remembers what Trump did to them, sanctions, and the killing of their revered and senior general. So there's no love lost between them. I keep coming back, partly from what I hear in the region, partly by putting the dots together. Where does Israel sit at the moment? Despite what it says, people on the ground and supported by those who rarely know the local situation are pretty adamant that Israel has not defeated Hamas, that the tensions on the West Bank are increasing, and that Hezbollah is giving the IDF a bloody nose. Israel launched an attack on Iran, again, from those who really know, as opposed to the PR that was put out by Israel and the Western intelligence services. The first wave of Israel's F-35s, etc., never got close to Iran. They were locked on by Russia's latest, I guess, radar jamming equipment, and basically turned tail. And then what was due to follow them was a fleet of conventional bombers to bomb Iran. That was abandoned. So where do we sit today? Why is it that America has sent a fleet of B-52s to Qatar? Why is it that, as reported, an Israel frigate-stroke-destroyer has sailed through the Suez Canal and is now in the Red Sea, armed with ballistic missiles? Israel, I liken at the moment to a caged lion. It's losing on all fronts. It is determined to achieve its objective, which basically is Israel's lands are from the sea to the river. Why is it that Israel's defense minister was fired? Because he used to be a divisional commander, close to the military, did not want an attack on Lebanon, thus an attack on Hezbollah. So he's been fired and replaced by somebody with very limited military experience, but who shares Netanyahu's beliefs. So I think the stage is being set. Whether directly or indirectly supported by America is questionable, but I keep coming back to the basic thesis. It was the UK and America who are the founding fathers of Israel, and they're not going to let Israel go. And the incoming administration is pro-Israel, everything I hear. And the incumbents, the new incumbents in the State Department, from what I hear, are pro-Israel as well. So at some stage, I think either before inauguration, but certainly at some point in 2025, I think there is a high risk that this region is going to explode. Because if Iran is attacked, Iran has already told America, we will attack your bases in the Gulf, and we will attack the oil fields. I think the UAE, where I live in Dubai, I think we are the Switzerland of the Middle East. And I think that the American military base may not be spared, but I think the oil fields will be.
Yeah, that is one hell of a prognosis and a lot of good informations. And I
Come
hope
on, I
that
said,
I hope that everything will not
this
come
is
true.
me putting the dots together.
Yeah, totally. No, I really like the breakdown, and unfortunately, some of that is true and is going to be true, but I hope not all, definitely. What is the solution for an average guy like me or like you? How can we protect from that bad times that are really coming? Is the gold solution for that? Precious metals, hard assets. What's your take?
Well, I think, I mean, at the moment, again, I'm not a betting man, but if I was betting, I think that well, let's say, I'm sorry, I'm thinking out aloud. Let's say that what I piece together is correct, and that next year we're going to have a regional war here. On that basis, global inflation will take off. You don't want to be in bond markets. You want to be in inflation hedges, which will be equities and base metals and obviously gold. You want physical assets. In fact, if we're looking beyond just this medium term, the world is going to move much more into physical assets than financial assets, particularly post 2027, 2028. Because think of it this way. I think if you look at a chart of US CPI from, let me get the dates right, from 1960 something to 1982, and you compare it with what's happened to US CPI in recent years, it's tracking it almost, it's a very close correlation. So what it's telling us is that in the next few months, we've got a further fall in US CPI, and then it takes off. And you had a peak in the last big inflation era of the 1970s and early 80s. The peak US CPI in 1980 was 13.5%. What was the peak long-term 10-year Treasury? 15.8. What is the yield in a couple of years' time, 24, 26, 3 to 4 years' time, of 10-year yields, 10-year treasuries yielding over 10% to a highly indebted world and a highly indebted US system? You're going to crash it. Obviously, the majority, all the big analysts will say there's no way we can have 10% yields. Well, I'm very sorry if you've got inflation yielding 13% plus. The bond markets, which central banks don't control, are going to, they will want a return. So, sorry, but we're probably going to go close to 15%.
Yeah. So what's in the what's then in that situation? What is in the card for monetary systems all over the world? It will be a global collapse, so we will see another form, a return of gold standard or similar form of currency backed by real hard assets. What's your take?
Well, I think that the Brics has laid out the path towards having a currency that is linked to assets rather than a dollar, put bluntly, is linked to debt. So the path that the Brics is set on is the creation of a Brics currency, which will be 40% gold, 60% local currencies, but those currencies linked in turn to gold. So if you are South Africa and you want to borrow from the National Development Bank, the Brics Bank, you've got to lodge a comparable amount of gold. It's interesting what China and Russia do, so I'm told. Russia has a trade surplus with China. The PBOC lodges gold of a sufficient amount that covers Russia's surplus. That, I think, is going to be a linchpin to how the Brics new system will work. First phase, it's using local currencies. It's going to take time before they actually are able, because the difficulties are immense. Conflicts between currencies, different states of development, so on and so forth. But they'll make it. They're determined. So if there was no war, then I think it's probably sometime around 26, 27 before they're in a position to launch their new currency. However, I think that war will accelerate everything.
Yeah. Could that currency actually propel gold to 10,000? Could gold in that kind
Don't
of
ask me.
environment? No, I'm not asking you for the okay number, but could really gold in this kind of environment, and we could enter the mania phase, and really gold could fly. I mean, the gold-backed Brics currency can only help do that, right?
Here's a very interesting comment by a super analyst called Luke Groman. What the Brics are doing is this. They are recycling their surpluses into their own countries, real assets, and net surpluses into gold. Thus, the Brics capital account is open on a limited basis via gold. And the higher the gold price goes, the more open the Brics capital account will be.
Interesting. Very interesting.
And who holds most of the gold in the world? China and Russia. China, if you look at the amount of gold that Chinese citizens and institutions have bought since the Shanghai Gold Exchange was opened in 2002, it's around 25,000 tons. And I know from various people that Chinese ministries, not just the PBOC, and including the PLA, own approximately 25,000 tons. So China's total is north of 50,000 tons. Russia's, I know from what I was told about 4 years ago, so it's probably a bigger figure now, then had 12,000 tons. Most of it held, I forget the name of the company that sits above Russia's central bank.
Yeah, and when
And
you
both
mention
Russia and China's annual gold production is around 300 tons a year.
yeah, that says it all. Agreed. Yeah. When you mention an alliance between Russia and China, how do you see that in the future?
I think the alliance is so covers everything from military to economic to education, culture. It's a very firm alliance. America has always or has been trying to break it. They've not succeeded. I think Trump will try to break it. He won't succeed. It's all encompassing. It's all encompassing for one very, very simple reason. America and NATO want to dismember Russia to gain control of Russia's natural resources. And China knows that they'll be next on the list.
Yeah, yeah. Simon, on what commodities are you bullish the most?
I think I become very bullish on oil and gas, either later this year or early next year. apart from the Middle East, America has to replenish its oil reserves, which I'm sure that Trump will do. China's economy, despite the negative opinion being hailed around by American institutions and hedge funds, is actually improving. And so I think between now and the end of the year, you're going to have a good pop in copper prices, say from where are we now, around 9,500 to about 11,500. And I think the other base metals will follow. I think that early next year, a lot of the bullish US government stats that have been produced since the middle of this year, revisions will come in, and we'll find that actually America has been in recession. And I think that Europe is in no better position. China will be recovering, but a large part of the world that consumes base metals won't be. And I think with recessionary trends, and we're probably going to see hopefully only limited strife in America, but it could be anything in the first 6 months. So I think we're going to see big corrections through the first 9 months or so of next year in copper and other base metals. Big corrections. But then, assuming we're not in war, then with Trump's plans to cut interest rates, etc., the US economy will be recovering strongly. China's recovery will be ongoing. There you've got the two pillars of the global economy rising together in an inflationary environment as well. So 25 and 20s, late 25, 26, and early 27 will be bull markets for base metals, which will take copper to new highs. Then you don't want to be the last dancer on the floor before the music stops, because with 10-year yield, 10-year treasuries and other long-term bonds yielding 10% plus, you're going to have big collapso.
Yeah. Final question, Simon. I want to hear your take on the real estate. Do you believe that real estate is still a good investment and protection from the bad times?
I'm pausing before answering because I'm thinking of the pros and cons.
Okay.
I think the answer comes back to yes. I said you want to be long of physical assets and not long of cash assets, not long of financial assets, particularly in that 27 beyond period. You want to own your own property, unencumbered if possible. You want to be sure that you have access to food supply, water. So what else can I say?
That's a good point. So basic life stuff.
Yeah.
To own a real estate.
How can I survive in a very difficult environment where electricity can be cut off tomorrow because the government or the grid runs out of money? So there are these extremely good household generating sets. You want to get hold of one of those. There's some very good and relatively cheap ones coming out of China. They're powered by folding solar panels, and they can power your electricity, power your fridge, power your aircon, etc.
Yeah. Simon, thank you for coming to my show. Great chat, as I expected. Some black prognosis, but I hope they are not going to be correct. So thank you very much, sir, for coming to my show.
My pleasure, and I hope I'm wrong too.